So let's say that you have a seated flexion test, positive on the right, a deep sacral sulcus on the left, and a posterior inferior ILA on the right. So I'm going to draw out my sacrum. I know it's a torsion because these are opposite, so I have a blank on blank. Seated flexion test, positive on the right, sacral sulcus deep on the left, ILA posterior inferior on the right. Now approach this the same way that you did the other ones. So because, I should have drawn a P, not an R. Because the seated flexion test positive on the right, that means your axis is on the left. So you have a blank on left. Now from here you have to remember that if this sacral sulcus is deep, this sacral sulcus is going to be shallow, right? So if you think about it, you look at the axis again, you look which way the sacrum is being rotated around the axis. It's shallow on the right, which means it's going to be coming upward. It's going to be coming up like this. So there's two ways that you can go about it now. If you remember that going upward is an extension dysfunction, and you remember the two ways that you can diagnose an extension dysfunction, you either have a left on right or a right on left. The two letters are opposite. If you like to go about it whichever way the sacrum looks, if it is shallow on the right, going about the axis, the sacrum is now looking to the right. It's now looking to the right. And since it's looking to the right, it's a right on left. So let's do another question. If I can erase all this stuff. So the next one, we have a seated flexion test positive on the left. We have a shallow sacral sulcus on the left. Shallow sacral sulcus on the left. We have a posterior inferior ILA on the left. So once again, I'm going to draw out my sacrum. Seated flexion test positive on the left. Sacral sulcus is shallow on the left. So shallow on the left. Posterior inferior ILA on the left. So I can approach this the same way that I do all the other torsions. So positive on the left, axis is on the right. So blank on blank. Right axis, right. Blank on right. Since it's shallow on this side, and this is the axis, and my hand is a sacrum, if it's shallow on the left, that means it's going into extension. Shallow extension. And if you remember the two extension dysfunctions, you can either have a right on left or a left on right. And if you want to go which way the sacrum is looking, the sacrum is now looking to the left. Pretend like the front surface of my fingers are my eyeballs. I am now looking to the left. Looking to the left. So you have a left on right. So I have two more torsions. Two more torsion example questions. So let's say that you have a deep sacral sulcus on the right. You have a posterior inferior ILA on the left. And you have a positive sphinx or spring test. Positive sphinx or spring test. So you approach this by drawing out your sacrum once again. You don't know which side the seated flexion test is on, but that's okay. They gave you the sphinx or spring. Now you look at the sacral sulcus. The right side is deep. The left side is posterior inferior. So now if you take into account that it is a torsion, so it's blank on blank, you know that it is positive sphinx or spring test, which means that it has to be an extension dysfunction. And remember, there are two extended dysfunctions or backward torsions. You can either have a right on left or a left on right. Now if I'm looking at this, now I have to go through my head, okay, which one of these dysfunctions makes sense given this finding? So if I have a deep sacral sulcus over here, that must mean that this is shallow. And if this side is shallow, the only way to make this an extended torsion is if I put the axis right here. So if the axis is here, axis is on the right side, I know this is not the dysfunction, and this is the dysfunction. So if I want to pretend with the pen and fingers again, if this is the axis, this is the sacrum going backwards, I'm now coming up and I'm looking to the left. My fingers are looking to the left. Left on right. I really think that if you go through a whole bunch of practice questions like this, you'll be able to get these in no time. I think that they're really easy points on the exam, especially on your board exams. They're really easy. So last torsion. Let's say that we have a deep sacral sulcus on the left, a posterior inferior ILA on the right, and our sphinx or spring test is negative. So the first thing I'm going to do, draw out my sacrum. I don't know which side the seated flexion test is positive on, but that's okay. They gave me sphinx and spring. So I know that sacral sulcus is deep on the left, ILA is posterior inferior on the right, and since it's a negative finding, that means that it must be some sort of a flex dysfunction. And if you remember your flex dysfunctions, the letters are both the same on each side, so you can either have a right on right or a left on left. Now, if you're looking at this picture, the only way that you're going to be able to get either a right on right or a left on left is if one side is deep, one side is shallow. So the deep side has to be going forward for you to get one of these dysfunctions. So if I put an axis here, that won't make sense, because since this is deep, that means this is shallow, and if that's shallow, then that's not the correct dysfunction, because now we're going to have a right on left dysfunction, and we know that's an extension dysfunction. So we know that's not right. So the axis has to go here. Right axis, because it's deep here. So if this is the axis, the right side is the deep side, this is a flexion dysfunction. So my eyeballs are now looking to the right. I'm going forward into flexion, which means that my diagnosis is right on right. So you can now confirm this a couple different ways. Your sphinx or spring test was negative, which means it's a flexion dysfunction. This is a flexion dysfunction. Your axis is on the right. This is correct. And it is deep on this side. Going forward, your eyeballs are looking to the right. Right. So you have a right on right. For this final part of the video, we're going to go over how to diagnose the sacrum when you are given findings of L5. So there are a couple of rules that you need to remember for L5 and how it relates to the sacrum. Whichever direction that L5 is side bent, that is going to be the axis for your sacrum. So whichever way it's side bent, that's going to be your axis. So if L5 is side bent to the right, that means that your sacrum is going to be rotating around a right axis. If L5 is side bent to the left, that means that your sacrum is going to be on a left axis. The next thing that you need to remember is whichever way L5 is rotated, the sacrum is going to be rotated in the opposite direction. So if L5 is rotated to the right, that means that your sacrum is rotated to the left. If L5 is rotated to the left, that means sacrum is rotated to the right. So let's go through a couple practice questions really quickly. So let's say that you have a L5 and it is side bent to the right and it is rotated to the left. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw out my sacrum, just like always. We know that L5 is side bent to the right, so we know that the sacrum has a right axis. We know it's rotated to the left, which means that the sacrum is going to be rotated to the right. Now looking at this, we know that this is going to be some sort of a torsion, so blank on blank. The axis is going through the right sacral sulcus, so it's going to be on the right. And the only way for the sacrum to rotate to the right around this axis is if my hand is the sacrum. Rotating right means I'm going to be pushing forward. Pushing forward. And you already know the answer to this. So if it's pushing forward, it's deep over here. That means it's going into flexion. It means that you have a right on right dysfunction. Right on right. Another finding that they could have thrown at you for this question is, let's say for some reason the patient also had a negative sphinx test or a negative spring test. This confirms your finding of some sort of a flex torsion because a right on right is a flex torsion. So you know that you are now correct. So let's do another one. So let's say that L5 is side bent left and rotated left. So first thing that I'm going to do, draw my sacrum. Side bent to the left, axis is on the left. Rotated to the left, that means the sacrum is rotated to the right. So I know this is a torsion, blank on blank. Left axis, rotated to the right. So if this is the axis, the only way that I can get the sacrum to rotate to the right is if I come backward into extension. So the anterior portion of my fingers is looking to the right. My eyeballs are looking right. So knowing that, right on left. If they were to happen to throw the sphinx or spring test at you, you can confirm it. So right on left is an extension dysfunction, which means that if the patient had a positive sphinx or spring test, you have confirmed your diagnosis. So one last thing that they might try and do to you is they might give you a way to diagnose L5 by knowing your sacrum findings. So let me think of a good one here. Let's say that your sacrum has a seated flexion test that is positive on the left. You have a deep sacral sulcus on the left, and you have a ILA that is posterior inferior on the right. And the question stem wants you to figure out what position L5 is in. So from here, I'm going to diagnose my sacrum. I know that it's a torsion because of these two, blank on blank. Seated flexion test positive on the left, axis is on the right, sacral sulcus is deep over here. So right now, I already know that the diagnosis is going to be right on right. So because of this, if I'm going to translate this to L5, I know that it is side bent to the right because it has a right axis. L5 is side bent to the same side as the axis. And whichever way that L5 is rotated, it's going to be the opposite for the sacrum. So we know that L5 is rotated to the right. L5 must be rotated. Oops, I wrote that backward. L5 must be rotated to the left. So then this will be your answer on the exam. So be careful when they give you findings and they want you to diagnose L5 and not the sacrum. You may need to loop through how to diagnose the sacrum in order for you to get how to diagnose L5. So I hope that this video was helpful for you. If you still have questions, feel free to email one of the fellows or message one of the fellows. I know that a lot of you guys have my email as well. Good luck in a couple of days, and I'm sure you guys will nail it.